Hey everyone! So today I will be responding to the dumpster fire of a conversation between that vegan lawyer, George Martin, also known as Carnism Debunked, and Sonia Sae. This is not a personal attack on any of them. I actually appreciate some of their content. I just believe they have an incredibly shallow understanding of politics, which I will illustrate. So let's get into it.
Intersectionals, they say that by default veganism is a left-wing movement. They think that the left has a monopoly on anti-oppression. They think that they view it in this very simplistic way, where it's like the further left is the more good you are and the further right is more bad you are. It's like instead of the scale being left and right, they seem to view it as good and evil.
Yeah.
And so they think that, to be vegan, you have to be good, not evil. And therefore, you have to be this view, this political view, which is obviously good. They view it in a very simplistic and childish way, basically. And they don't really have much comprehension on the way that the world actually works.
The irony! It's true that some leftists hold a simplistic view of good versus evil, oppressors versus the oppressed, but this good versus evil, us versus them mentality is not unique to the left. Where is your evidence, George?
The media is more or less left, unless you're watching Fox News or, I don't know, like reading The Australian, where I live. The majority of respected media does have a left bias. There's ABC here, SBS. So, you can't say that the media doesn't influence. Everyone accepts that the media influences public opinion, but people seem reluctant to accept that the media is left.
This is a prime example of that vegan lawyer's shallow understanding of politics. The media absolutely does not have a left bias, certainly not in the United States. The media has a neoliberal bias. This is a key theme throughout this conversation, where they conflate leftism with neoliberalism. Leftists are anti-capitalist, anti-establishment. Liberals are pro-capitalist, pro-establishment, but will wave a rainbow flag and say Black Lives Matter. Mainstream media outlets, including social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, are corporations. Corporations are interested in maximizing profit. They see that the tides are shifting and that Black Lives Matter is popular now, so they will pay lip service because if they don't, they will lose money. They don't give a flying fuck about actually addressing systemic inequality, which is why they prop up corporate Democrats like Joe Biden and stifle progressive candidates like Bernie Sanders. Case in point, independent news sources are not favored by the YouTube algorithm. This is illustrated by the stifled growth rate of independent news channels such as Secular Talk, The Humanist Report, among many others. I almost exclusively listen to independent news sources, yet I am constantly bombarded with CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News. If I'm listening to Kyle Kulinski, which, keep in mind, I've listened to countless Secular Talk videos, so you'd think the autoplay feature would select the most recent unwatched Secular Talk video. Nope, it's a guarantee that CNN or MSNBC will autoplay next. It's not that leftist ideas never get promoted in media, but they're certainly not favored. Mainstream media outlets are corporations shoving capitalist propaganda down our throats. History has shown that when the establishment receives enough pressure from people rising up and taking to the streets, the first thing they'll cave on is symbolism. It's relatively easy to remove a statue or change a street name. With more pressure, they'll cave on substantive demands like gay marriage. But the core economic demands of the left have yet to be met.
It didn't cost the nation 1 penny to integrate lunch counters. It didn't cost the nation 1 penny to guarantee the right to vote. But now we are dealing with issues that cannot be solved without the nation spending billions of dollars and undergoing a radical redistribution of economic power.
The media has an interest in overemphasizing the racial profiling element of police brutality, so they can evade addressing the root cause, systemic economic inequality. the material conditions that lead to higher crime rates in Black communities. Racism becomes individualized, something we can overcome with more implicit bias trainings and corporate diversity trainings, which, by the way, have been shown to be ineffective. So no, the media does not have a left bias. The left has been fighting the media since the dawn of its existence.
Yeah, and something I've noticed is that even right-wing papers now, they actually look pretty left-wing, because there's even certain things that, I think even right-wing papers somewhat conform to like PC culture and cancel culture. So even these right-wing papers are now sort of veering more left in terms of what they conform to and what they can and can't say.
Yeah. So in terms of like political diversity, it's not a good sign. Or in terms of freedom of speech, or the willingness people are like feel that they have the freedom to like voice a dissenting political opinion, or just a different political opinion that isn't left.
This is called progress. Imagine thinking, oh man, people can't get away with saying racist shit like they used to, as if this is a bad thing. I'm not denying that some leftists hold views that are actually racist and regressive. I made an entire video about my issues with SJWs. But generally speaking, the fact that the Overton window has shifted to the left over time is a positive thing. And to that vegan lawyer's point, political diversity, diversity of thought, and freedom of speech are good and great, but when these concepts are used to deflect criticism and play the victim, that's where I have a problem. Freedom of speech does not grant you freedom from criticism or freedom from social consequences. Personally, I welcome diversity of thought and listen to a diversity of perspectives. But a tolerant society cannot tolerate political views beyond a certain threshold, which admittedly can be hard to gauge. Generally, the further beyond this threshold you go, the more ostracization you will face. George Martin has been ostracized to some extent for his denial of systemic racism and white supremacy. Is that so unreasonable? I'm sure we can agree that arguing for freedom without parameters is insane. Our disagreement lies with what those parameters should be. Your First Amendment rights are not under attack, so can we please stop fucking talking about free speech and the free exchange of ideas as if they are? You're just pissed that you're losing the battle of ideas, bro.
Did you see the video recently? Because a lot of the leftists and anti-Trump people are saying stuff like voter ID laws in America are racist. It's like, this is shutting out people of color to have voter ID laws and stuff like that. So they took to the streets, this news organization, they took to the streets to ask Black people if these laws are racist. And it's just like, they first asked a load of white people, and they were like, do you think voter ID laws are racist? They're like, yes, of course, Black people might not have access to these things. It's, very white privileged thing to do. Then they asked a load of Black people, and they were just like, do you think voter ID laws are racist? They were, what do you mean? As in, do you think it's racist to have your ID with you to register to vote? And all the Black people were like, no, what would be wrong with that? And they were like, well, white people are saying that you might not have, it might not be good for you because you're Black and you might not be able to do it. And they were all just like, what? They were so offended by it. It's like, what the fuck?
Okay, so I haven't seen the video he's referring to, but the way he's describing it demonstrates his lack of scientific rigor. Interviewing a random selection of white people and a random selection of Black people on the street and asking them leading questions is not a very reliable method of getting to the truth. I wouldn't hold up a street interview as evidence, even if it aligned with my views. I recognize that it's for entertainment value. You can easily cherry-pick answers and splice them together to suit your narrative. The thing about voter ID laws is that America has had a long history of voter suppression, and many attempts work and others don't. It turns out that voter ID laws don't have a significant impact on minority turnout in elections. But here's the kicker. That doesn't mean the intention wasn't racist. The thought was, since Black and brown people are more likely to live in the inner city and use public transport, they are less likely to have driver's licenses. And since it costs money to obtain a state ID, minorities who are disproportionately poor due to systemic racism will have an additional barrier to vote.
And did you see there was Joe Biden recently said he told the black interviewer, let me tell you something. If you have a problem figuring out who to vote for out of me and him, that's Trump, then you ain't black.
Yeah.
Joe Biden said that, and yet intersectionals are saying everyone should vote for this guy. I mean, it's insane. I mean, I'm not saying to vote either way, by the way. I'm just saying, you know, vote for who you want in the US election, whatever. I'm just saying, like, why would they condemn Trump voters, but then they're not condemning Biden voters, even though he's saying that? And Biden also said, I think it was in the 80s, when asked if he would send his kids to an inner city school, he said, no, I don't want my kids growing up in a racial jungle. And he also said he opposes gay marriage. Again, why are intersectionals voting for this guy?
Dude, who the fuck are you talking about? Because every leftist I know absolutely loathes Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a racist piece of shit. That's why his campaign strategists have been hiding him. It seems that every time he makes a media appearance, he says something outrageously stupid.
No sitting president has ever done this. Never, never, never. No Republican president has done this. No Democratic president. We have racists, and they've existed. They've tried to get elected president. He's the first one that has.
The only reason some leftists are voting for Joe Biden is in the interest of harm reduction. He's the lesser of two evils. Progressives have literally launched a campaign called Settle for Biden.
There's so many videos of Joe Biden creeping on little girls, and when you talk with like hardcore leftists, they ignore it, and I don't understand it. It's like, oh well, you know, or they use this I think it's called ethical dissonance, that they are gonna be like, oh, but you know what, Trump did this too, and it's like, it's still wrong. Like, two wrongs don't make it right.
Y'all really need to pay closer attention or shut the fuck up about politics, because you're so off base. The people refusing to criticize Joe Biden are neoliberal Democrats, not leftists. Stop conflating progressives with the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is not progressive. Fuck Joe Biden.
It's just crazy because the more I educate, because I'm really into like black conservative thinkers and stuff, and the more I educate myself on them, like some of the most successful, underappreciated black like academics and thinkers and like economists and stuff, like they're all conservative. I don't know if you've heard of like Thomas Sowell, Larry Elder, John McWhorter, and you know they collaborate occasionally with people like Sam Harris, Dave Rubin, and it's like this whole, it's like a growing movement, I guess. Walter E. Whitman, I can't remember his surname, but yeah, I think it's really showing that in this specific case with regards to black people, like, is my understanding, facilitating an ideology of victimhood has not been good for black America, because they all, like, the Democrats get about 90% of the black vote, so they've been voting for the Democrats for the past, you know, whatever years, and they're not in a better, from my understanding, you know, like when you look at the writing and everything, they don't seem to be in an empowered position. It doesn't seem to be empowering them, whatever they're doing, and that's the leadership they've been voting for. But these other conservatives seem to be taking really well to like ideas like personal responsibility, economic freedom. So I think there's something to be said there about, you know, some political ideologies work better for some people, and it seems, you know, in this case, voting liberal for black people hasn't seemed to be doing that. Then that's kind of what Trump said. He said to them, what have you got to lose? Like, you're already losing. And everyone took that as really like blunt, and well, like liberals took it as really insensitive, but a lot of black people responded to that, and they were like, hey, he's not talking down to us. He's not, you know, treating us like we're babies. He's just saying you're in a shit position. You're unemployed. Like, you're all this. If you vote for me, like, take a chance.
Yes, the Democratic Party has failed black Americans. It's true. But to run to the right is to legitimize the false dichotomy of the two-party system. The Republicans are even worse than the Democrats on racial justice issues. The Republicans perpetuate the model minority myth by pointing to successful black people as evidence that darker skin doesn't hold you back. They love to say, how can America still be racist when we elected a black president? The problem with the model minority is that they do not represent the whole picture. There are still huge racial disparities, and the reason isn't their culture, it's systemic racism. Black conservatives will point to fatherless homes, teen pregnancy, and black-on-black crime as the reason for these disparities. But you have to ask yourself, why are fathers absent? Why is there a higher teen pregnancy rate? Why is there a higher crime rate? And the answer is poverty. It becomes a vicious cycle where crime reinforces poverty. Then you have to ask yourself, why are they poor? And the answer to that is systemic racism. History is highly relevant to the present because Black and Indigenous people of color lack generational wealth, which is the biggest predictor of success. Racist policies led to the mass incarceration of minorities, aptly called the New Jim Crow. Of course, our justice system negatively impacts poor whites as well, but it disproportionately impacts Black Americans. The idea that racial disparities can be explained by minorities having a victim mentality and not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps is racist. Sure, learned helplessness may reinforce these disparities, but the way to combat learned helplessness isn't to promote racist ideas cloaked in a message of empowerment. I can see how mainstream neoliberal messaging and even some leftist messaging can be disempowering, but Black conservatives offer a message of pseudo-empowerment. They empower Black people by convincing them that white privilege is a myth. On the other hand, thoughtful Black leftists like Cornel West offer a message of true empowerment. Privilege is real and Blacks are disadvantaged, but let's all come together and organize to overthrow this corrupt, racist system. Harnessing people power requires empowering individuals to take action. True empowerment is embracing and seeking the truth, not a comforting lie. These Black conservative intellectuals that vegan lawyer props up expect all Black Americans to rise above their circumstances without government assistance. To expect every member of a certain race to be exceptional is a racist pipe dream. Progressives recognize that racist policies hold minorities back, and the only way to eliminate racial disparities is to implement anti-racist policies. Examples of anti-racist policies include ending the drug war and increasing funding for education in low-income areas. And the beauty of anti-racist policies is that they end up helping poor whites as well. Ultimately, the reason the Democratic Party has failed the Black community is because half measures don't work.
Unemployment is significantly down. I mean, it was going down anyway, from what I've read. But under Trump, the Black demographics employment rate's gone significantly up, and they seem to be doing well under him. So it's like, but you can't say these things. You can't have these opinions in public because, oh my God, you're racist or you're I don't know.
Okay, so I looked up the statistics she's citing, and I want to start out by saying I don't have Trump derangement syndrome, so if Trump were to do something good, I wouldn't have a problem admitting it. With that said, Trump is a pathological liar and loves to take credit for things he doesn't deserve credit for. In the case of him bragging about the Black unemployment rate being at an all-time low, there are many problems with this. For one, the overall unemployment rate has been declining since 2008, a trend that began under the Obama administration, which that vegan lawyer did acknowledge. And second, according to the Washington Post, the 2018 yearly average unemployment rate of 6.5 for African Americans was the lowest rate recorded in a series that began in 1972. But if you use a different Bureau of Labor Statistics metric that goes back to 1954, the yearly average unemployment rate for Blacks was lower in 1969 at 6.4%. And if you look at February 2018 to February 2019, the Black unemployment rate actually rose from 6.8% to 7%. Although this is still historically one of the lowest Black unemployment numbers we have, it still shows the persistent inequality that Blacks face despite gains in educational attainment. And of course, Trump's incompetent COVID response has completely trashed our economy, and unemployment is the highest it's been since the Great Depression. Regardless, a low unemployment rate is not a holistic measure of economic well-being because it doesn't factor in whether or not workers are employed full-time or underemployed. For that vegan lawyer to give credit to Trump for the 2018 black unemployment rate in 2020 shows that she's not looking at the big picture.
Yeah, and animal liberation doesn't have a
A
political. Sorry,
Yeah, no.
I was just gonna say that animal liberation doesn't have any political affiliation.
It doesn't, and it shouldn't in principle. But is that the reality of the animal rights movement?
We know that the left loves gatekeeping movement. So obviously, if you're how many groups I've seen on Facebook of administrators banning or saying straight up, if you are a conservative, you're not a vegan, and kicking out conservatives.
The idea that a movement for animal liberation should be apolitical demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of what politics are. Everything is political. In fact, it is impossible to be apolitical because neutrality is a political stance. Conservatism is generally defined as the commitment to uphold traditional values, whereas progressivism is defined as the push for social reform. I said this in my video, Why Conservatism is Antithetical to Veganism, but it has been the Conservative Party that has fought to restrict rights for women and LGBT folks. If you identify as a conservative, but you support gay marriage, for example, you have to recognize that there has been a mass cultural shift, and it was progressive activists that steered the ship in this direction. 20 years ago, the conservative position was to uphold traditional marriage. Homophobia is now socially unacceptable, and it wasn't conservative values that got us here. Animal liberation is a progressive ideal, which I elaborate on in my video, Why Veganism is Political. Resistance to veganism is the commitment to upholding the tradition of human supremacy. To Sonia's point about gatekeeping, I made it very clear in my video about conservatism and veganism that I am not shunning conservatives from the vegan movement. If a conservative vegan wants to spread the vegan message by appealing to a conservative audience, that's great. I'm not going to stop them. A conservative audience certainly isn't going to listen to me, so more power to them. I recognize that conservative vegans exist, and I welcome them as individuals to our movement. I do not, however, welcome their toxic ideology. If a conservative or centrist vegan tries to spread their conservative views to a vegan audience, they should be prepared for pushback, as that is the nature of the battle of ideas. As a progressive, I am interested in appealing to a progressive audience, and part of appealing to a progressive audience is explaining why human supremacy is a conservative ideal, and veganism is a social justice movement. I am fully prepared to respond to pushback from conservative or centrist vegans. Lastly, it should be telling that the majority of vegans are left-leaning and not conservative. Why might that be? Just as conservatives blame poverty on crime rather than crime on poverty, conservative vegans believe that the reason so few vegans are conservative is because conservatives are ostracized by other vegans. This is backwards thinking.
A lot of well-established activists like Gary Yourofsky have always said that conservatives are more responsive, have a more genuine concern for animals than leftists do, who kind of see it more as a extension of human rights or just to be consistent with my own ethics.
This is entirely anecdotal. If conservatives were genuinely more receptive to the vegan message, we would see this reflected in statistics. We see the opposite.
You keep getting intersectional say stuff like the vegan movement needs to be left-wing for it to be more inclusive, blah, blah, blah. What they don't realize is that left-wing arguments are actually preventing people from going vegan. They're acting as an obstacle. You can't say that about right-wing arguments. Yes, there are loads of right-wingers give dumb arguments for not going vegan, but leftists give those exact same arguments as well. And on top of the dumb arguments that the right-wingers give, plants feel pain, thousands of years though, blah, 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 lions, the left-wingers have these additional arguments that are obstacles. Food deserts though, I'm too oppressed though, my folk have to worry about my own oppression before we go vegan. Privilege though, no ethical consumption under capitalism, though. So veganism is pointless.
Colonialism.
Yeah, I mean, like, so they're just adding more obstacles for people to go vegan, because if people didn't have these pervasive thoughts in their heads that, you know, oh, I can't go vegan because I'm not white privileged or something like that, way more people would be vegan if these little arguments weren't floating around.
This makes absolutely no sense. Left-wingers may have different excuses, but they don't have additional excuses. Left-wingers will bring up food deserts and cultural colonialism or whatever, whereas right-wingers will invoke God's will. If it were true that progressives had additional excuses, we would see this reflected in the numbers. There would be more conservative vegans than progressive vegans. This is not the case.
All these other social justice movements, pseudo social justice movements, like, in my opinion, like Black Lives, like even the Me Too movement to an extent, where it's very distorted what's actually happening. It's not evidence-based. They're not basing a lot of their claims like on data and research. You know, I personally find most intelligent conservatives to be more facts-based, less emotional, and when you do manage to break through an animal rights message, they understand animals as an independent movement.
The irony pains me.
I mean, what do you both think of horseshoe theory? Do you know of horseshoe theory?
No.
So horseshoe theory, and I firmly believe in this, is the theory that the further one is to the left, the closer one is to the far right. So it's like so instead of the simplistic axis that intersectionals believe it is, where it goes sort of good, sliding scale, evil, it's actually like a horseshoe, right? And sort of centricism is here at the top of the horseshoe. And then as you sort of go down the curve, so far left and far right sort of meet at the bottom. So they're like close together. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
And I firmly believe that. I'm a firm advocate of horseshoe theory.
There are many problems with the horseshoe theory. It's true that there are some similarities between the far left and the far right, but these similarities are of far less significance than the differences. For example, both the far left and the far right oppose mainstream media and neoliberalism, but they do so for very different reasons. The motivations behind their opposition are paramount. Horseshoe theory is overly simplistic and ignores the y-axis on the political compass, erasing the libertarian left. To compare someone like Bernie Sanders to a left-wing totalitarian dictator is deeply misguided. Proponents of the horseshoe theory ignore the role centrists play in the rise of the far right. To quote Martin Luther King, "I must confess that over the last few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice." To compare anti-fascists to fascists and anti-racist to racist is to compare vegans to carnists. That's not to say that there aren't unreasonable leftists who adopt similar tactics as their enemies, but the same can be said about vegans. To say that the left and right, and by left I mean the true left, not the Democratic Party, are two sides of the same coin is an incredibly shallow analysis.
The political left has, over the years, kind of disintegrated into encompassing the issues that we are talking about now. And then I think above that, there is a larger demographic who is just quiet, and they probably align left, and they don't want to, because they hate conservatives so much, they're not going to criticize the more radical leftists because they don't want to seem like their political alignment is, bad or anything like that. And then I think a lot of people are also just neutral, and they'll just go with whatever. And if left is dictating, the climate of veganism, that's just what they're going to go with. So that's really what we're combating here. It's not just like annoying lefty human rights, like humans first, animals last people. It's a lot of things and that's why I think it's really important for more vegans to be vocal about it, because the more that say, hey, you don't have to be a conservative to defend someone else's right to freedom of speech or to, question narratives that are obviously distorted. That's like really the only way to go, because it's not just left people, it's this culture of fear that's been created. There's so many things like white people, for example, just can't talk about now, like they can't talk about Islam in public. They can't question Black Lives Matter as a movement in public. What controversial issue is actually okay to talk about if you're not like Sam Harris or Dave Rubin or someone with a big platform? Like nobody really wants to. None of my white friends want to get into it with anyone else except for me, because I know I'll, have a conversation with them. And then there's also this group that denies this is even a problem, because they just don't want anything bad they don't want the left to be portrayed as bad. So they'll just be like, no, it's not like that. No one feels like their freedom of speech has been stifled. It's like lots of people feel that way if you actually ask them.
This idea that white people can't talk about certain subjects is laughable. Listen, I used to be a huge fan of Sam Harris. I've read all of his books, okay? I still appreciate some of his work. But he is very skilled at legitimizing propaganda by positioning himself as the voice of reason, playing the victim of the regressive left's crusade against free speech. This supposed crusade against free speech does not stand up under scrutiny. Sam has a massive platform, and he is free to speak his mind. He is simply on the losing side of the battle of ideas when it comes to race relations. White people who feel that they can't talk about certain subjects feel this way because they fear the backlash. But it has nothing to do with their skin color and everything to do with their views. That vegan lawyer contradicts herself when she acknowledges that Black conservatives get a shit ton of criticism for expressing their views. Imagine a future where vegans are the majority. Now imagine stubborn laggards arguing that there's this culture of fear where they can't freely speak their mind about their views on hunting. You would see their argument for what it is, a joke. People deny that this is a problem because it largely isn't. Of course, many people feel that it is, but facts don't care about your feelings. The data doesn't support the notion that there is a genuine threat to free speech coming from the left.
I was going to say, look at Trump and Obama. They can say the exact same things, but if Obama says the exact same things Trump says, the left don't bat an eyelid. And then Trump says, like, when Obama did the long spiel about, securing our borders and only ensuring the right people come into our country, the left never said anything about that. And then Trump just says might say something about build a wall, and everyone loses their mind or whatever. And Obama did pretty much the same thing, the same as the Obama put a temporary ban on Muslim immigration as well. Again, the left said absolutely nothing about that. The gay marriage thing.
Yeah, and opening the Obama under the Obama administration, they opened again the conflicts on the Middle East too. They send the troops and everything. So.
Wow, there are hypocrites on both sides of the political spectrum? What an astute observation, George. It's amazing that he doesn't recognize his attempt to smear the left as an appeal to hypocrisy. I know he knows what an appeal to hypocrisy is. And once again, they're conflating leftists with Democrats. The left doesn't criticize Obama? Y'all are talking out of your ass. The left rips Obama to shreds for his colossal failures as president. We'll give him credit where it's due, but principled leftists are no fans of Obama. Fuck Obama.
Do you think then when they say, when they bring skin color into it, it's more of a case that they don't actually mean it? They're actually more talking about ideology, but why do they bring up the race then? I mean, like, if this is the case, why do they say stuff like, oh, you only have this opinion because you're a white male and stuff like that? If they don't...
It's simply based on character assassination.
It's a character assassination, and they're leaving out the sentence that they're actually thinking in their head, like, you can't have an opinion because you're a white male who disagrees with me. You know what I mean? If you were a white male that was agreeing with them, they wouldn't be calling you white or insulting you for the color of your skin. It's because you disagree with whatever their political ideology is. And I get the same thing, like, oh, you're an Asian bootlicker, you're a, I don't know, like...
It's an easy way to shut down the argument then, basically, and that's why they do it.
They weaponize the way you look and the way, your things that you can, like, they don't attack your argument because they don't have enough strong arguments to attack it. So what they do is they attack you. So like the viewer, let's say, or the whole how it is viewed, think, oh yes, this person is, X. So then his argument is wrong. So you're
Yeah.
white male cisgender, whatever,
I actually agree with them here. The Oppression Olympics is narrow-minded and regressive.
I think the left have somehow pushed this idea that the conservative political spectrum will never embrace like minorities, or will never embrace people of color, or like it's just like a white, rich white kind of thing. But we can see now, if you embrace the ideas of capitalism and economic freedom and like individual responsibility, the conservatives will accept you because it's based on people's values and ideologies. You know what I mean? That's why Candace Owens is doing so well. That's why I have friends that are part of the Liberal Party in Australia, and that's conservative, and they're Indian, or they're people of color. I know you don't like that term, but whatever. It's just the quickest one I can think of. So yeah, I think it just shows it works both ways. No one's really interested in race in the way that we're seeing it. Like they just want people on their side for a particular value or a particular political ideology. And if you embrace money and capitalism, no conservative group is going to be like, go away if you have the skills that they want. And that's like the most non-racist thing in the world. And if you think about capitalism that way, like money doesn't have a like preference. You know what I mean?
Where do I even begin? The generational wealth that whites largely benefit from today was built on slave labor. In other words, capitalism and racism are conjoined twins. To quote Ibram Kendi, the origins of capitalism cannot be separated from the origins of racism. Racism, not to be confused with good old-fashioned xenophobia, is a relatively modern concept. The concept of race was invented by white imperialists to justify the slavery of Africans and the genocide of indigenous people. Different African tribes, for example, share as little and as much in common as different races. Given that race is an entirely made-up concept that has no basis in biology, racial disparities can only be explained by racist ideas and racist policies. The fact that such stark disparities exist shows that racist ideas and racist policies persist. Racial disparities are a result of centuries of colonial rule. To say that capitalism is the least racist thing in the world, and money doesn't have a preference, is to ignore all of this, and to ignore the data showing racial discrimination in hiring. Not every business is racist, but the capitalist system is built off the exploitation of workers, disproportionately Black and brown people. Corporations often put up a facade that they care about racial justice by hiring minorities to appear woke and diverse. And capitalists love to tokenize minorities who will promote their capitalist agenda. But this is still racism, just a different form.
Yeah, 100%. And it comes down to this opinion of, do we live in a meritocracy, a system where you get what you put in, or do we live in a system that favors certain groups? And I believe the former for sure.
The belief that we live in a meritocracy is racist. If it were true, then the only explanation for the existent racial disparities would be that there is something inherent about Black or Indigenous people that makes them less likely to succeed.
Let's be honest, Black Lives Matter has nothing to do with animal rights, like zero. Just in the same way that, gay rights has nothing to do with BLM. It's just a fact. And I wouldn't expect an LGBTQTA, whatever it is now, to start advocating for Blacks or whatever.
Veganism is a social justice movement fighting for the rights of an oppressed group. Therefore, there are many parallels between it and other social justice movements. There are many ways in which carnism disproportionately hurts people of color. One example being the fact that the vast majority of Black people are lactose intolerant, yet dairy is pushed on them. Another being the very real issue of environmental justice. Pollution from factory farms disproportionately impacts Black communities. There may not be a direct link between animal exploitation and police violence, but we live in a very complex world and everything is interconnected. We are taught to ignore the suffering of animals, just as we're taught to ignore the history of white supremacy and the racial disparities that still exist. We are alienated from the process of the things we consume, the dead body parts we consume. We are brainwashed to believe that police are here to protect and serve, when that is not the whole truth. And how can you say that BLM has nothing to do with LGBT rights when Black LGBT people exist? What about them? Do they not count? Are we only fighting for the rights of heterosexual cisgender Black people, or... Like, how can you say Black Lives Matter when you're excluding a whole ass group of Black people? One of the most frustrating things about vegans like that vegan lawyer and George Martin is that they will draw comparisons to other social justice movements in an attempt to persuade human rights advocates to go vegan. But then they'll turn around and say that animal liberation has nothing, zero, zilch to do with human rights issues. Which is it?
Okay, so we agree that conservatives are isolated from the movement. And it's not just, I guess it's this whole rise of identity politics, that it's not just that they're isolated, it's just activists are manipulated into not saying certain things or saying certain things, or this whole idea. I don't know if people watching will fully have a proper understanding of identity politics. Did we just want to define it just really quickly? For my understanding is that it's a focus on a physical attribute like race, color, skin, and that kind of determines your legitimacy in speaking about a specific subject, which is a little bit retarded.
Yeah, and also, yeah, I think the definition kind of varies from person to person, I guess. It's kind of vague because it does, but also my understanding of it is people will say they are a this in order to fit in with this thing, or they'll even adopt a certain view just so they can fit. So it's like if someone's I don't know, if someone's, for example, left wing, but they've never thought about abortion before, they'll go, oh, I've noticed like other left-wing people are pro-choice, so I guess I better be pro-choice as well and argue the pro-choice thing. So I consider that identity politics as well. It's like, I also think like up in Scotland, for example, the two big football teams there are Celtic and Rangers, and they sort of divide each other by Catholic and Protestant. Oh, those Catholic bastards. Oh, you're Protestant, blah, blah, if you support Rangers. But I actually don't think many of the supporters are believers themselves. I think actually a good lot of them are probably atheists, and they just say, I'm a Catholic because I support Celtic, or I'm a Protestant because I support Rangers. Yeah. And I think it's that kind of thing as well.
Here's a clip from my video, Am I a Social Justice Warrior?, where I discuss identity politics. Progressives are often accused of weaponizing identity politics, and I'm not saying they never do. This is a prime characteristic of the SJW. But I also see neoliberal Democrats weaponizing identity politics against progressives. They prop up corporate shill candidates like Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, and Pete Buttigieg, and then turn around and accuse Bernie supporters of being sexist, racist, or homophobic for criticizing them. And they won't shut up about the fact that Bernie is an old white dude. Diversity is important, of course, but policy positions and voting record should be the most important metrics in deciding who to vote for. Ironically, conservatives who lambast identity politics are sure quick to use these tactics when it suits their narrative. Conservatives love to tokenize people with marginalized identities who have internalized misogyny, racism, whatever it is, and will perpetuate the negative stereotypes against members of their own group. Anti-Black racism is less obvious to the mainstream when it's coming from a Black person. Women who bash feminism and gay men who bash the LGBT community are very valuable to propagandists. Why? Because of their identity. This should illustrate the closeness between the Republican Party and the corporate Democrats. Both weaponize identity politics against the left and serve to uphold capitalism. As Cornel West beautifully put it, we've tried black faces in high places, and look where it's gotten us. I reject this type of identity politics used by anyone, and I strongly reject this characterization of the left. Plenty of leftists reject identity politics. There is no leftist doctrine stating that cishet white men are scum and shouldn't be allowed to participate in discussions about politics. Bernie Sanders, Noam Chomsky, and Karl Marx are all cishet white men.
Do you think white people nowadays face more racism than other races because of IDE? I think he means identity politics, or she.
Yeah, at least for sure in the animal. I mean, I saw this brilliant status the other day that said something along the lines of, imagine thinking you live in a white supremacy when you can get cancelled for criticizing literally any other race than white people. It's the it's the only racial group that it's socially accepted to criticize.
Ay, ay, ay. Do I even need to respond to this? I'm so tired. Okay, I'll make this brief because this video is already super long. To claim that animal rights activists getting canceled for denying white supremacy are victims of racism is to believe in the concept of reverse racism. Let me be super duper clear. People of color can in fact be racist towards white people. That's not reverse racism, that's just racism. This is why I recommend the book How to Be an Anti-Racist to everyone, not just conservatives and enlightened centrists, but also leftists. Anyone can be racist. Ibram Kendi articulates this point so well. Black people can hold racist ideas about black people. And although white people aren't systemically oppressed, therefore anti-white racism shouldn't be the focus of the conversation, black people can also hold racist ideas about white people. Racism is racism, but that doesn't mean all forms are identical. I don't think actual anti-white racism is justified, but people are more sympathetic to it because it's a response to centuries of oppression. That's why you're more likely to get canceled in progressive circles for expressing anti-black racism than anti-white racism. But reverse racism is not racism. Reverse racism, according to Wikipedia, is the concept that affirmative action and similar programs for redressing racial inequality are a form of anti-white racism. Belief in reverse racism is widespread in the United States. However, there is little to no empirical evidence that white Americans suffer systemic discrimination. White people are finally waking up to the reality of systemic racism. With greater awareness comes greater social consequences for defending the status quo. And getting called an ignorant, racist, privileged white male for expressing racist ideas is not anti-white racism. Bringing it back to George Martin's hilariously ironic claim in the beginning that leftist ideology is simplistic and childish, and that leftists have no comprehension of how the world actually works, I hope you can see how overly simplistic and childish their worldview is. Their knee-jerk response to intersectional vegans bringing up the fact that humans are animals is that humans are oppressors. Why should we fight for the rights of oppressors? This is a shallow way of thinking because the world isn't black and white. It's not divided by oppressors and the oppressed. There are systems of oppression that stem from our ancestors creating unjustified hierarchies as a means to serve their own self-interests. And in this complex world, you can be a victim of oppression while simultaneously supporting other systems of oppression. To create a just world for everyone, we must be consistently anti-oppression. That means fighting for the rights of imperfect people. Would you have been against the abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, and the civil rights movement in the 60s because they were speciesist? No? So why dismiss social justice activists today on the basis of speciesism? Again, we haven't beat racism. Racial disparities still exist. The civil rights movement is ongoing. Black Lives Matter may be a new slogan, but it's an old fight. In conclusion, that vegan lawyer, George, and Sonia are, number one, confused about what politics even are. Veganism cannot be apolitical because it's inherently political. Number two, conflating leftism with neoliberalism when the two are in direct conflict. And three, using the negative stereotype of the SJW to define leftism. As with veganism, we shouldn't use individuals to define movements. Instead, we have to ask, what are the core tenets that all of its adherents agree upon? Leftists agree that neoliberalism has been a failed social experiment and that fascism is not the answer. Leftists don't all agree on specific goals, strategies, or tactics. If you're going to criticize the left, define your terms. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for future videos. Alright, peace out.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat.